All right. So today in class we're going to learn about how to work specifically with watercolor by learning a few techniques. So the first thing we're going to do is use some tape to tape off and create 10 different sections on the paper. So you can see that I have begun by taping off the edges, and I've actually taped this a little bit to the table. The shape that you make your pieces or your sections doesn't matter, just so you have 10 or 11 areas to paint in that will stay separate from each other. So this takes a minute. You have to kind of, plan your layout a little bit. They can just be rectangles. You can create some different shapes if you like I'm doing. I'm sort of experimenting. If my tape's too short, I'm just going ahead and making it be an angle. I think that should be 11. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, so I have enough spaces for what we're going to do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my watercolor. For this activity, it doesn't matter what color you use. You'll actually need to use more than one color at a certain as we go along. So put in, remembering to wake up your paint, to put some water, a little pool of water in the colors that you're going to be using so that it is ready for you to use. So hopefully you grabbed your green baskets from the counter with your paintbrushes. You've grabbed water, and the other thing each of your tables needs is one of the baby blue supply buckets. That look like this. They're over on the side counter. This supply bucket has everything you're going to need to do the activities that we're going to do. So it has the tape in it. It has a lot of the other stuff that we're going to need. So making sure that you have this basket at your table and that you're being careful not to dump. This is actually a liquid inside of here, so you want to be careful that it stays upright. But that basket will need to be at your table as well. So I've got my paint and it's ready to go. And I'm going to just mix up a pool of some blue here. And we're going to start with something called a flat wash. Okay, so it's a super good skill to learn. I've got kind of a big puddle of paint mixed up over here. So you can kind of see that I've got sort of a big pool. I have a big pool of water in this blue, and I have a big pool now over here on my mixing tray. And I'm just going to choose one of the sections. It doesn't matter which one. And we are going to do, like I said, it's called a flat wash. And so the goal for this is to keep the paint as even as possible. Okay, so you can see I'm just gently moving the brush. It kind of ran out of paint, so I'm going to come back. I'm just going back and forth and back and forth, and I want to have hopefully no stripes or pools of paint. I want to have a nice even color of paint. If I do have a little section that looks like it's going to pool up because of too much water, I want to squeeze my paintbrush dry, and I can come back and I can take a little bit of that paint out of there. Okay, so you can see those marks now where I left my paintbrush. So that is skill number one, a flat wash. And we're going to practice that a couple of times actually, because it takes practice to make a flat, even wash of watercolor on your paper. We're now going to try the next type of wash, which is a gradated wash that goes from dark to light. So we're going to use water to lighten the wash as we go. So I'm going to use the same color that I used for my flat wash, and I'm going to go right underneath it. And you can see I'm going to start here with my dark color. I'm going to rinse and get a little bit of water in my paintbrush, and I'm going to go 2 or 3 more. I'm going to rinse and get a little more water in my paintbrush. So it's a lot like when we did value yesterday. You're gradually rinsing out the paint that's in your paintbrush so that your wash gradually fades as it goes from the top to the bottom. So that's a gradated wash with just one color. So that's a monochromatic gradated wash. Okay. You'll see that the tape is keeping my paint separate. So I can move on to a section that's right next door to the first section, and it doesn't create a problem where the paint is trading places. We are going to do this again, this gradated wash, but now we're going to change colors, all right? So these skills are useful things for creating and making a painting. Things like the gradated wash make really great skies. A gradual color change, we'll talk about, you know, like doing that when we actually make a watercolor painting. So I'm going to pick another section, and I am going to start the same way I did before. I switched colors, you'll notice, but I'm going to just go about halfway across that square, and now I'm going to go back to the blue that I used to start with, and I'm going to come from the opposite side. So the blue now, the opposite side, and I rinsed my brush now, and I just hit a little bit of water, and now I'm going to just drag my blue into my yellow. So you can see I'm going back and forth here along that gap, and I have this gradual transition now from yellow to yellow green to green, and then to like a blue green, where my colors are gradually changing from one to the next. So you can see that I definitely started with yellow, I've made a green in the middle, and I have a blue on the opposite side. So that is a gradual color changing wash. All right, we've talked about this next bit a little bit in class, and that is that watercolor will always follow our water. So for this next one, I'm just going to paint some clean water down the center of the square that I'm going to use, right? Clean water down the center of that square. There's a little bit of blue in my water, so you can kind of see the clean water. It's got a little bit of blue color, right? Now I'm going to go back to my yellow paint, and I'm going to put yellow over here on this side. So it's a little like my gradual wash, except this time I'm not going to wash. I'm just going to touch. I just tipped my paintbrush so that I filled that spot in with yellow, and you can see that it's leaking to the left there because it hit that clean water in the center place, and it's just going to flow. And I'm going to do the opposite thing from the other side. I'm going to start with this nice dark blue, and I'm going to hit that water again. A lot of times this is when you would maybe want to lift your paper a little bit. So I'm going to peel that tape up, and you can see as I lift the paper, I can make the one color run into the other color. This is called wet into wet color mixing. So you can see all I've done is lift the left-hand side of my paper, and my blue is now running into my yellow. It is also running all over my tape. I'm going to take a clean, dry paintbrush, and I'm going to soak up this extra paint right here. So if you ever have a puddle of painty water that you need to soak up, we want to create what we call a thirsty paintbrush. And to do that, you just rinse your brush and you squeeze all the water out using a paper towel. Okay. I can also explore another technique. So this is called wet into wet color mixing. I can grab a little bit of extra yellow paint now, and I can tap my brush on the back of my hand, and I can do a wet into wet color splatter. So I put my yellow, you can see that it's splattered on the blue. Splattered on that blue paint so that you can see those colors start to bloom in with each other there, okay? A little bit more paint leaking onto my tape here. I'm going to try to keep that clean so that it doesn't go into the next section. So far we've done a flat wash, a gradual light to dark wash, a gradual color changing wash, and wet into wet color mixing. Now is, so far we haven't needed anything out of the bin except for the tape. Now is when you're going to need to find a white color crayon. We're going to be doing a resist. So already we're creating a resist effect here with our masking tape. My paint isn't going into the paper where I have the tape, okay? But you can use other things to resist the paint, like a wax color crayon, right? I am going to choose a square again. I do want to push fairly hard. And I am just going to draw some shapes. It's a little tricky, right? Because it's a white color crayon on a white piece of paper. But I can do whatever I want. I can make a pattern, squiggly line, write your name. I think I have a squiggly line and a couple of dots there. So, like I said, make sure you press fairly hard. You want to color fairly completely, even though it's a little hard to see. And now I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to use my blue paint again because I want this to be a dramatic reveal. So after I've drawn whatever I want to draw in that area with a white color crayon, I am simply going to wash my brush right over the top. So I'm practicing that nice flat wash skill again, evenly back and forth. And you can see that the color crayon does not, the paint does not stick where the color crayon was, right? It pulls up a little bit on the top edge. You can kind of see where you did or did not color very completely. So you can see me kind of wiping off some of my color crayon marks that I can see are puddled there under my paint. But you get the idea. This works really well, like if you are painting like a snowy scene or you want to keep an area of a watercolor painting white, you will color on it first with a color crayon really hard, and then it preserves those white areas. So even if you paint over the top of it, it will stay, for the most part, a lighter color or white color. Another great effect that you can do, we'll use it when we make landscapes and we create kind of a grass effect, is to do something called sgraffito. So I'm going to be using the end of my paintbrush while the paint is still wet. I'm going to select a section here. I'm going to change color just for variety. And I'm going to paint this section in, again, flat wash. We're kind of constantly practicing that flat wash skill. Paintbrush back and forth, gentle, trying to have no stripes in my paint. Now I'm going to flip my paintbrush around and I am going to use it as a writing tool. So I'm just using my paintbrush to write or draw on my piece of paper while that paint is wet. I'm pushing fairly hard, and usually what happens is the paint will pool in those areas and I'll create a slightly darker band of color where I have used that paintbrush. So we'll let that set for a bit, and kind of as that starts to dry, those stripes should start to show up a little. So I'm pressing in and letting that paint pool. Basically what I'm doing is I'm using my paintbrush and creating dents in my piece of paper, right? Those dents end up creating a puddle of paint where the paint will sit. now I'm going to show you how to lift color off. So you're going to need either a paper towel, one that's dry, or some of the baskets have some Kleenex tissue in them. So paper towel, Kleenex tissue, either one works. We're going to be doing something called a lift off, where I'm going to put paint onto my paper, but then I'm going to lift part of it off again using my dry paper towel or my dry tissue, okay? Either one works. I have a little bit of a preference for the paper towel because it makes a crisper line, I think. Especially when the paper towel is fresh, crunchy, fresh paper towel. So I'm gonna take my blue paint again because I think it will make the most dramatic color effect. And I'm gonna paint this section in. This is actually one way we'll make a sky with clouds later on when we learn how to paint landscapes. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a little water into my wash and practice that gradated or gradual wash effect. And you can see, especially on this long, skinny, landscape-oriented rectangle, it looks a little like a sky. I'm now gonna take my paper towel and I'm gonna have it be in kind of a loose clump. And I'm gonna press it right down onto my paper, just sort of gently. And you can see that I am lifting sections of that paint, right? So that there we have a white cloud effect just with me lifting that off with a paper towel. So I can go in and I can kind of make some puffy clouds using just a paper towel on my piece of paper. I have a lot of glare on that wet paint. I'm not sure how to fix that right now, so you can kind of see I have this effect now of like a big poofy cloudy sky day. And it was just with a paper towel. I'm lifting off the paint. This is also a way, like if you paint something and realize, oh, I don't like that, that's not what I wanted to paint there, you can lift that paint off right away as well. So there, if I tip that a little bit, more of that shine comes off of there. So you can see that that looks like a cloudy sky. So all I did was push my paper towel down, pull those clouds out of there a little bit so that it looks like a cloudy sky. So that's how you lift paint off, and that has to happen when it's fairly fresh. Just press down with the straight down with the paper towel. Next, from your bin, you are going to need the salt. All right, it should be in a little jar with a red gingham lid. You'll have to share. There's just one jar per table. You don't need very much salt. Now this is an effect that shows up best after it's dry. So the salt will go on your paper and it won't come off until, well, Monday when you come back to class. I am going to use my green paint, practice my flat wash skill again, paint that in with that green paint, and now I'm just gonna take a little sprinkle of salt and I'm just gonna sprinkle that right on there. I don't want so much salt that it completely covers, right? I just want a couple of pieces of salt, and you can see right away that the salt starts to attract the paint, and that leaves us with a really interesting kind of texture later on. And like I said, you don't want, like, it shouldn't be completely covered with salt. I want some areas that are paint and some areas that are salt. So just a gentle sprinkle of salt. Too much salt and it kind of ruins the effect. So a tiny pinch is all you need. So my original flat wash is now pretty dry, okay? So remember here, and this one is still a little wet. Yep, oh, I just left a finger mark there. We talked about I had splashed paint on my wet into wet when it was originally painted. Right, and you can see my wet into wet here is continuing to change as that paint like drifts and moves in the puddle that's there. So I can still now lift and move that paint again. So if you still have a puddle in your wet into wet mix, you can see that it'll still shift. So all I did again was lift my paper and I've moved that pool and completely changed that again. But we splattered a second color on there, and those splatters kind of bloom. This is dry now, and I'm going to show you the effect of a dry splatter. You can use a paintbrush or a toothbrush, and I'll show you both. So I'm going to mix up some of this green, and what I'm going to do is hold my fingers under my paintbrush, and I have quite a lot of green paint, so it's kind of a lot. My paintbrush is like right on the verge of dripping already, and all you do is just tap, 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 and you can see I'm leaving droplets of paint down on my paper. You can do the same thing with a toothbrush. I'm going to get the toothbrush wet in my water first, and then I'm going to get the toothbrush into my like little pool of paint, right? And then I'm going to try to aim as carefully as I can, and I'm going to, you know, run my fingers along the toothbrush. Oops, my toothbrush is dripping, seriously. But you can see that my toothbrush splatter is much tinier dots. I personally prefer a lot of tiny dots. I'm gonna pull a couple of these off of here. Lifting off, remember? Dry paper towel. Just get rid of a couple of those. I personally prefer the method where you use the toothbrush, or the paintbrush. I feel like I have more control than the toothbrush. You can see I have more paint splatter here on my tape, actually, than I have on the spot that I was trying to splatter. So it's personal preference. I have had students that prefer a toothbrush. Like I said, I personally prefer my paintbrush. I feel like I have better control. If you're farther away, the dots with your paintbrush will be smaller. If you're closer, they'll be gigantic, like mine, like big polka dots. Now I'm going to paint in another section, and you're going to need another thing out of your bin. So I have rubbing alcohol in your basket, and there are little Q-tips, and there are drinking straws. And rubbing alcohol will also resist the paint. So you want to make sure there's a tiny bit of rubbing alcohol on the bottom of these. And they've been used for India ink, so a lot of they're black kind of on the bottom, but it is rubbing alcohol. So I'm going to put a nice painty wash on here. Again, flat wash, nice even strokes so that my color is nice and clean and even. Trying for no stripes. And now you can use either one. I can dip my Q-tip in there and I can daub. You'll see I'll get little dots. You can use a paintbrush and you can splatter, or you can take the end of the straw